So what I've got up on the screen is a patient scheduling simulator, if you like. It's a waiting time simulator. And what we've got happening here is we've got some patients. We just had 10 patients that have been added to the waiting list at the top there. So this was an outpatient list. They might be new referrals coming in from the GPs. And these patients are being given slots. So these are the appointment slots there, and they're being booked in. I'll just speed this up a little bit. I'm sorry, I didn't get a lot of that.
Okay, is it possible to just push the projector over so we don't have an obstructed view?
You're quite right. Is that better?
A little bit further? A little bit?
That's that?
Yeah, there we go.
Yay, great. Okay. Thank you for that. So we've got patients being added to the waiting list up here, and then they get booked into appointment slots down here, and when all the slots are booked, we hold the clinic, and all the patients get seen, time moves on, and some more patients arrive. So this is just like real life, isn't it? Everything's completely predictable, there's no waiting list, you're doing today's work today, absolutely fantastic. Yeah. So that's a bit boring, isn't it? We've got exactly 10 patients arriving every single week. We've got exactly 10 slots available every single week. Nobody's urgent. Patients are very happy to take the slot that they're given. So what I'm going to show you next is a scenario where we've introduced a little bit of a randomness. So two things. Firstly, in the next scenario, we're going to have the number of patients who get referred is going to be different every week. And the second thing that's going to change is we're going to give the patients a bit of choice. So if the patient doesn't want to come in straight away, they want to come in next week or the week after, then that's fine. We'll let them book a slot then. Now, can anybody predict what's going to happen when we introduce random referral rates and patient choice to book into a different week?
Peaks and troughs.
Peaks and troughs. Peaks and troughs. So when there's a trough, what's going to happen when there's a trough?
Unused capacity.
Unused capacity. So we're going to start to build up
Empty slots.
empty slots, because so if we waste a slot in 1 week, can we carry those slots forward and use them next week? So if we've got an average of 10 referrals every week and an average of 10 slots a week, but things are variable, we're going to start to develop a waiting list. Now, is that waiting list, so any of you from NHS Improvement? Okay. Variation is something that NHS Improvement rightly make put a lot of stress on. And if you've got variation, then you need to, in some circumstances, you need to lay on slightly too much capacity to absorb that variation. So can anybody predict, is this, when we start to grow this waiting list, is this waiting list going to sort of arise and then stabilise, or is it just going to keep on growing? Got a vote, one vote for keep on growing. Any more votes for keep on growing? Yeah, a lot of votes for keep on growing. Right. Gosh, you have been paying attention. Right, let's have a look. Okay, here we go. So we've got slightly too few referrals this week, so we wasted a whole load of slots. Oh, going to waste some more slots. See, they're looking into the future. These pesky patients, they won't do what they're told. They keep being on holiday and not being convenient and wanting to go in the future and keep wasting these slots. There's the waiting list building up. You can see we've got this waiting list building up there. Damn, we wasted another 4 slots that week. You know, we can't keep up with demand. We've got enough slots to cope with the average, but we're not keeping up with demand because we keep wasting slots. Oh, they're all full that week. They're all full again this time. Look, no waste. No waste again. We've got 26 patients on the waiting list now. It's sort of stabilised. It's not growing anymore. So why is that? If variation means that we need to lay on slightly too much capacity, why is it stabilised? Well, the thing is, in short, we've got a full order book. So we've got a waiting list now. We can always fill that capacity because we just pull them off the list. It doesn't matter if we have fewer referrals in a particular week. So we just wasted 3 slots in that last week there. It will happen occasionally, but broadly speaking, this list has stabilised. Let's run this at full tilt for a while, just in case don't believe me. So we started on today's date, so in November. So waiting list is in the 30s. It'll go up and down because of random variation. Here we are, a year on, we're still in the 30s. So averages do work. They do work when you've got a waiting list that you can draw from. So when you can time shift the patients on the waiting list, when you can manage them, and you've got that full order book, averages work. So we've got an average of 10 referrals a week, we've got an average of 10 slots a week, and that is absolutely fine when we've got routine patients on the waiting list. Okay. Right, let's try something a little bit more complicated again. What we've done here is we're adding clinical urgency, the urgent patients, red. And we've also got cancellations, so we just saw a removal there. We've got cancellations, we've got removals. So roll this a little bit faster, otherwise we'll be here all day. So we'll let this build up a little bit. Can anybody predict what effect urgent patients are going to have on the waiting times for routine patients?
Increase them.
Increase them, yeah. Can you explain why?
Because you're being fencing some capacity, usually you'll have more unused capacity because of that impact.
Okay, yes, that's one reason. So we've got some urgent slots down here. If we ring fence them, then you would need to allow more urgent slots than the average urgent demand, because then you would need to cope with the variation, because you can't time shift urgent patients. But what we've got here is a situation where we haven't actually ring fenced the slots. We're able, so if there's an urgent slot at risk of going to waste at short notice, we can pop a routine into it, which is what people would do in real life. So that's not the reason. Anybody else got an idea as to why urgent patients push up waiting times for routines? Queue jumping, absolutely right. The clinically urgent patient jumps the queue. If you go to the post office in Britain, we're very good at queuing in Britain, you join the back of the queue and you get seen when you reach the front of the queue. First come, first served. Has anybody been skiing in France? A little bit different when you're queuing for a ski lift in France. So people are, it's all elbows, isn't it? Elbows and ski poles. If people are jumping the queue, you get cross because you know that you're going to have to wait longer. And it's the same here, except nobody gets cross because these are patients with cancer or conditions that are deteriorating, and everybody understands that they absolutely have to get in quickly, and they're prepared to take the trade-off that it means routine patients wait longer. Speed this up a little bit. So rather than, we've got a similar size of waiting list, 30-something patients, but you can see the waiting times are coming out to kind of 4 weeks now. So people are waiting a little bit longer with that level of urgency. You can also see that there are more complicated dynamics happening as well. Sometimes we will have a situation where there are empty urgent slots that are at risk of going to waste. And as we saw before, if you waste an urgent slot, then your waiting list is going to be one bigger than it could have been. And it will be one bigger forever. Yeah? So the worst thing you can do in a way is to waste a slot. So that's one bad thing that can happen. The other bad thing that can happen is that you might have an urgent patient to put, but nowhere to put them. Which, there's never a crisis when you want one. Yeah. So what the model does is it knocks routine. It's a long story, I won't get into it now, but we did quite a lot of research into what the best strategy was. But the combination of those two things means that you can manage the urgent slots flexibly with the routine slots and avoid wasting capacity. Right, you have now seen all the complexity that I'm going to introduce into the model. You're all happy with how the visuals work, yeah? So what we'll do now is we'll start using this to unpack the drivers of waiting times and look at the things that cause longer and shorter waits. In this scenario, it's the same as it was last time, except what we've done is we've slightly starved the system of capacity. Can anybody predict what's going to happen if we slightly starve the system of capacity?
Waiting list grows.
Waiting list grow. When will they stop? Never. Excellent. Excellent. They will grow and they will grow and they will grow, and there is no limit to this process, and waiting times will grow with them. Great, you've got that. Right, let me point out one thing to you. Let's say imagine this is the RTT waiting list. What's the RTT standard?
96% within 18 weeks.
Yes, on an incomplete pathways basis. So, what do people track? Do they track their performance? When they're tracking their performance, are they tracking the percent or are they tracking the weeks, usually?
Probably usually percent.
Usually percent. And in fact, they are asked to track the percent by NHS Improvement and NHS England. So they're tracking the percentage. Right, so on this waiting list, looking at this waiting list, incomplete pathways, what percent are within 18 weeks? All of them, 100%. Let's speed this up again. If any of you can see, you can actually see the percentage within, that's 8 weeks, not 18, I should have set that up. Right, what percentage are within 18 weeks now?
100.
100, yes. Oh. And it went away. Fantastic, we're doing well, we're doing well. Now what percentage are within 18 weeks? It's gone, it's gone. We couldn't see it coming, could we? Tracking the percentage, you couldn't see that coming. If you'd been tracking 92% within X weeks, you would have seen that coming. You'd have seen 92% within 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, 12, 14, 16, 18. You'd have seen that problem coming. What happens when you track the percentage is you don't see it coming, you're 100% more likely because of patient choice, high 90s%, and then suddenly it's gone. So the waiting list size is one of the two big drivers of waiting times. If I take this, let's pause that, and if I give it slightly too much capacity, so the new capacity is going to start feeding in over here on the right. When the new capacity kicks in, obviously the waiting list is going to start to fall. And my suggestion would be that when it comes to when the money starts to flow again and we start to be able to tackle 18 weeks, is that rather than doing a great big blitz on 18 weeks and trying to achieve the target quickly, that it would be much better to achieve it more gradually in mainstream NHS capacity. And the reason for that is that if you try and do it quickly, which is what happened in the last decade, you're doing a lot of evening sessions, weekend sessions. Use of the private sector doesn't have to be more expensive, it's still tariff, but it's not investing in NHS capacity. Whereas if you build up NHS capacity, get slightly ahead of the game in the main working week, then you can just keep that waiting list coming down gradually, until eventually it's almost gone. You only have to be very, very slightly ahead of the game. It's like Mr. McCauber and David Copperfield, you know, the sort of income £20, expenditure £20 and sixpence, result misery, income £20, expenditure 19, 11 and 6, result happiness. And it's like that. If your capacity is just ever so slightly ahead of demand, then that waiting list will shrink, and it will shrink until it's almost gone. And that's an investment in NHS capacity then, at main cost. Interestingly, I saw in the last few days, the Royal College of Surgeons and NHS partners came out with a joint statement recommending that you do it quickly. And I wonder why they might have thought that was a good idea. Who's going to benefit from the private sector, from purchasing from the private sector and doing evening and weekend sessions? Right. I'm very cynical on this. we simply run the model on a, so this is the scenario that we were looking at a moment ago, and you correctly identified how if the waiting list grows, the waiting times will grow. I'd like to put a nuance on waiting list. So here we've got 10 patients a week being added to the list. We've got a list size averaging 70. What would happen, and we've got waiting times, when it settles down, the waiting times are about 10 weeks when that settles down. So 10 a week, 70, that level of urgence, waiting time of about 10 weeks. What would happen if I doubled everything? So if, instead of having 10 patients being referred every week, let's say we had 20, and instead of having 70 patients on the list, we had 140. What's going to happen to the waiting times? Down?
Nothing.
Nothing? Anyone for up? Hands up for down. Go on. Hands up for the same. Hands up for up. And hands up for not sure, I'll wait and see. Okay, let's have a look. So we'll let this settle down a little bit. So we've got 20 patients a week being added to the list on average, a list size of 140. And when it settles down, let's speed this up again. So we'll just let that settle down. Who's feeling happy? It's the same. It's the same. Let me introduce you to something called Little's Law. Who's heard of Little's Law? Excellent. Little's Law says that the average waiting time is equal to the average arrival rate. It's the list size divided by the average arrival rate. So average waiting time is list size divided by average arrival rate. And that works no matter what the distributions are. It doesn't matter what the variation is in the arrival rate, it doesn't matter in what order you treat the patients, the average is always going to be the same. So it tells us two things. Firstly, the average waiting time is dependent on both the list size and the arrival rate, which is the ratio between the two. Secondly, averages aren't what really matter in the NHS, which is when we don't track them very carefully. It's how long the routine patients wait. And this goes all the way back to sort of the early 1990s and before, when there was market research done on patients to work out what was important for them. And what patients feared was that they didn't care how long the average patient waited. They cared how long the longest patients were waiting, because their fear was that they would be one of those longest waiting patients. So patients find it very disconcerting when they read about 1 year waits. They're not reassured by an average of 10 weeks. What they want to know is that they will be treated quickly. So, as the arrival rate on the waiting list goes up, then the waiting time you can sustain with the same list size comes down. So as the NHS gets bigger and bigger every year, as demand goes up every year, if the waiting list size were to remain steady, you'd actually see waiting times coming down slowly, year by year. So when I said you need to keep up with demand, stop the list from growing, to reduce waiting times, that isn't actually entirely true. And when you work at a policy level, this is important, because you need to bear in mind that as the arrival rate goes up, you could allow the list size to grow at the same rate without increasing waiting times. Good. Right. Now, you are now very well trained in well-managed waiting lists. There's one more thing I'd quite like to show you, and this is, again, just returning to the theme of clinical urgency. This is, we're back to 10 arrivals and the list size of 70 again. This is with a higher level of clinical urgency. We had 25% urgent in the previous one. This is 70% urgent. Just wanted you to see what it looks like if you have a really, really high level of clinical urgency in the system. Now, this is gamely trying to manage with the flexible slots, but actually, once it's that high, you probably want to allow extra capacity and absorb variation that way for the urgents. But, you know, that's what it looks like. Much longer waiting times for routines, you see, or urgents, longer waits for the routines. Right, let's move on from that one. So what you've been seeing so far are well-managed waiting lists. The computer has been doing the booking, it's been following 4 very simple rules over and over again. Computers are very stupid creatures, they just follow instructions, irrespective of the consequences. Humans, on the other hand, have creativity and are able to adapt to changing circumstances and respond to consultants sticking their heads around the door, asking them to cancel a clinic or move this patient. So here is a real waiting list. It's an orthopaedic elective inpatient waiting list. And now that you've all been trained in looking at the well-managed list, I wonder if you can identify any features of this waiting list that you wouldn't see if it was well-managed.
Got some very long waits.
You've got some very long waits. We've got one patient out here at 60 weeks. This is real data. It's not very recent, but it is real data. Yep, you've got a long wait. That long wait might be, I mean, it could just be that that's a product of a very, very big waiting list size. What do you think?
But it's quite flat as well.
Yeah, this is what we call technically a dinosaur tail. What you've been looking at so far are elephants. Yeah? And ideally we'd want to turn this dinosaur tail into an elephant. We'll do that in a minute. So why is it a dinosaur tail? What are they doing with this waiting list that caused it to be a dinosaur tail? Can you see? Yeah.
Really, right, we've got quite a lot of clinically urgents, waiting a long time, therefore deep
Yeah.
routines.
First class. Absolutely. You're not a doctor by any chance, right?
No,
No, because
who has the camera?
doctors... Right, I'll see you in clinic. So, yeah, that's the first thing consultants always say. Consultants love this stuff, by the way. They always want to see what their colleagues' waiting lists look like, and then they get disappointed when they see their own. No, consultants do respond very strongly to this. I mean, we've had some lovely meetings. You know, there's one team of urologists, for instance, and we showed them their personal waiting lists, and within about 20 minutes, they'd all agreed to pull their cystoscopy work, because they could just see that it made complete sense. Some of them had very short waiting times and some had very long waiting times. And they could even it all out by pooling, the more mundane stuff that they don't find particularly exciting. They can pool that. So yeah, long waiting urgents are an absolute no-no. That's a clinical risk. What we don't know, of course, is whether they've just become urgent or whether they were urgent at the point of addition to the list. So it would be nice to have that intelligence as well. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Long waiting urgents, you do not want to see any red to the left of about 4 weeks or 6 weeks. Anything else?
Gaps.
Gaps? Yeah. It's difficult to know what to say about the gaps and the spikes. It could be that the clinic was cancelled that week and there were no decisions to admit made, or that maybe that was a catch-up session when they laid on something extra. Difficult to know. It can be just sort of something that comes out. Skiing holidays, yeah. Early October, late September. Probably not. Yeah, difficult to know what to say about the gaps. Anything else? What about, do you remember how when patients don't have an appointment yet, they're hollow, like these ones, when they get given an appointment, like, just pop the mouse over that one. So that one is solid, because it's got an appointment, and you can see that patient flashing down there. That's the same patient, and that's when they're booked in for their operation. So, if you look and see which patients have been given appointments, have been given TCIs, what sort of standard operating process do you think they might be following?
Random.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, there are 3 main ways of managing a waiting list in the NHS. There's fully booked, which is where everybody gets given an appointment, and that is what e-referrals pushes you to do. Then there's partial booking, where you only book sort of 5 weeks ahead, 6 weeks ahead, because consultants have to give 6 weeks notice of annual leave. So if you book within the next 6 weeks, you know the whole session isn't going to get cancelled because of leave. So you book 5 or 6 weeks in advance, and when week number 6 is completely full, you stop booking patients. And what you see then is that all the long waiting routines have appointments, all the short waiting routines don't have appointments, and that's how that looks, clearly not happening here. Then the third way is a complete mess, and that's what we see on the screen at the moment, where it's seemingly random. So, yeah, so we've got long waiting urgents, we've got TCIs, appointments being issued at random, seemingly through the waiting list. Anything else? Anything odd about this corner down here?
Fluctuates.
Yeah?
Capacity is very variable.
Capacity is variable, yeah, that is true. That is mirroring the pattern of last year, so it did happen in real life, but yeah, that's one thing, yeah.
And there are quite a few empty slots in the near
Empty.
future.
Yeah, where are all the TCIs? We know why are so few of these apparently available slots booked into consultants running a paper diary system right at the back. I haven't heard of a paper diary system in a real hospital for some years now, but it probably still happens. Yeah, okay, I think you've got it all. Well done. Yeah, so that's it. So we've got a dinosaur tail because patients are being booked out of order, and they're not apparently using all the slots available. Now, if we can actually play this and watch this dinosaur turning into an elephant. So where we started is marked there. What you'll see is that the elephant shape starts to emerge immediately. Slow this down a little bit now to settle in. Right, so that's settled down a bit. We've got two things happening. Firstly, we turn the dinosaur into an elephant, and that's had an immediate impact on waiting times. So by treating the same patients in a better order, you've reduced the waiting time. I think this one is, let's check the scenario. Yeah, this is going to keep up with demand in the long term. So I run this at full tilt. Waiting times are sort of going up and down, but they're not really improving very much. Now this is just the stage of treatment from decision to treat up to when they actually get their operations. So a 15, 16-week wait is clearly far too long at that stage of treatment if they're going to achieve 18 weeks on an RTT basis. Yeah? So patient scheduling is not the only problem on this waiting list. It's also the size of the waiting list. So if we take a different scenario where they're actually going to reduce the list size. So we're starting with the same waiting list. And this time we're going to do a backlog clearance as well as improve patient scheduling. So there's the elephant emerging. And the list size is going to start coming down. And as the waiting list size comes down, so do the waiting times. You can start to see the patients going green, which means they're being booked within 8 weeks in this particular scenario. And then comes the end of the model. Should end up on about 5 weeks. There we go. Good, excellent. I've got where's my last one? I've lost my last scenario. That's annoying. Let me see if I've got 4G connection. I'll just see if I can resurrect that. Come on, you can do it, Data. Oh, I think it's loading. Yeah, there we go. Excellent. Okay, you'll notice every now and again I'm going through these sorts of screens. This is just our planning model that does all the demands and capacity modelling for a hospital. And what I've got up on the screen here is just to look at what the prediction is for waiting times for this particular service. So you can see it's coming along fairly flat, and then at the last minute, sort of from April, May onwards really, it makes a dive for the line, and we will suddenly see a rapid improvement in waiting times. So just before I hit play, anybody got any thoughts about what you can see on this waiting list? What's different about this waiting list compared with the last one? So the last one we looked at was orthopaedic inpatients. Orthopaedics is a specialty with very low urgency rates, about typically 5–10%, depending on how much spinal work there is. This is a general surgery day case list.
Quite a high proportion of urgent.
High proportion of urgents, yeah, that would be the main difference, yeah. Very high proportion of urgents, lots of cancer work. General surgery day cases tends to overlap quite a lot with endoscopy as well, so you've got quite a lot of cancer work in there, bowel surgery and stuff. So, yeah. Any thoughts about the way this waiting list is being managed?
Supply looks quite erratic.
Yeah. It's very lumpy, isn't it? So that dip there, that is early, that's sort of mid-July, so it could be a holiday effect. Yeah.
So your longer waiters are typically got a date, but they're not, don't seem to be getting booked into the earliest date.
Yeah, could be patient choice. One of the things that, because I spent a long time playing with this simulator, and one of the things that I wanted to find out three things. Firstly, I wanted to establish, firstly, what are the rules for how many urgent slots you should lay aside? Secondly, what's the relationship? Secondly, what's the best booking tactics? And then thirdly, what's the relationship between the waiting list and waiting times? So that was all helpful for that. But there were a number of other things that we looked at in the meantime. One of them was how much patient choice should you offer before it starts to have an impact on waiting times. We found that if you offer 3 weeks of choice, it has almost no impact on waiting times. And that was a really useful thing to know. Once you start offering 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks of choice, waiting times start to go up as they're booking further ahead. 3 weeks, almost no impact. And I understand that I think the e-referral service now allows you to set dynamic polling ranges. So you can say, I want you to set the polling range at whatever it is. So every patient, whenever they come on the system, they can all see at least X weeks where there's a slot available. And that is absolutely fantastic. It may or may not arise from a change notice I requested about 4 years ago for them to do exactly that, because I thought it would be a very easy win for them. Sadly, a lot of people, do any of you work with e-referrals? No? Yeah? E-referrals is a brilliant system, and it leads to a fully booked service, and with the dynamic polling ranges, patients should be able to spontaneously book themselves in the right order now. What I still see is a number of hospitals playing games with the polling range, which is how far ahead the patients can book. Because the hospitals go through a chain of logic that says something like, well, we don't want people to wait more than 18 weeks RTT, therefore we don't want our new outpatients to wait longer than, say, 6 weeks or 7 weeks. Therefore, we'll stop them from booking more than 6 weeks or 7 weeks ahead. Problem solved. And of course, what happens is that as the waiting list gets bigger and bigger and bigger, all of those slots fill up, and then whenever people go on the e-referral system, the patients go on, there are no slots. Unless they go on just after the next clinic opens up, and then they jump the queue and pile in, which makes the problem worse. And then the hospital takes control by, when you can't get a slot, you click the button and it generates what's called an ASI, an appointment slot issue. Not all of which are probably collected in the RTT stats, but they should be, because the guidance says it does, doesn't it? So I think there's probably possibly tens of thousands of patients missing from the RTT stats for that reason. Then the hospital takes control and has to try and find capacity for these patients, which takes about 5 or 6 administrative steps where 0 would have done had they just opened up polling ranges. I mean, the moral of the story is that you can't fix, if your long waiting times are caused by a waiting list that's just too darn big, you're not going to fix your waiting list that's too big by playing games with patient scheduling. You need capacity to keep up with demand. It's the only way of getting the list size down. Anyway, so a bit of a digression there, sorry about that. Right, so we've got, so patient choice, that's fine, but what we have got here are a lot of empty slots, so why haven't they filled the slots with their very full order book? Yeah, so that's an interesting one. Long waiting urgents, yeah, you wouldn't want to see urgent patients to the left of about 4 weeks, there's 4 weeks. We have huge numbers of urgent patients waiting really very long times, that is a clinical risk. If we hit play, the first thing the model is going to do is to book these urgent patients. Actually, let's speed that one up a little bit. The first thing the model is going to do is to sort out those urgent patients and remove that clinical risk. Can anybody predict what will happen to routine waiting times when we do that? They'll go up, yes, because we've suddenly got a huge slug of queue jumpers, albeit for the right reasons. So all of our capacity for the next 2 weeks is now being consumed by these urgent patients, well, 2.5 weeks really. Yeah, so that's going to push up routine waiting times, although the routine waits are so badly managed at the moment that it's probably not going to make all that much difference. So there we go, so now we're booking in some routines, it's booking into urgent slots the routines that were cancelled to make way for the urgents. We've got this weird transition phase now to go through where we've got very little capacity for routines. It's going to be a bit of a mess. Now this particular system is set up for partial booking. Do you remember I said there were 3 ways of booking a waiting list? Fully booked, everybody has an appointment, that's what e-referrals pushes for. Partially booked, which is what you're seeing here, where you only book up to the next 6 weeks so that nobody gets cancelled because of annual leave. And the complete mess, which is what we started with, that's the third way. But in partial booking, the urgents have all got dates, and all of the long waiting routines have got dates, but none of the short waiting routines have got dates. And that is characteristic of a well-managed, partially booked waiting list. That's what you should always see. Now, we predicted that waiting times would sort of hover for a while, and then they would sprint down to the 8-week target, sort of mid-June. So let's run this at full tilt and see how it does. The number of decisions to admit is mimicking what happened in that trust last year, and the activity plan has been set to achieve 8 weeks at the end of the period, and the way that the activity varies every week is mimicking what happened in the trust last year. So there we are, sort of trotting along at 18 weeks, which is roughly where we were. There's a huge spike in decisions to admit. They did a waiting list switch to outpatients or something like that. We do sometimes see hospitals doing a blitz on outpatients, and then a couple of months later they end up with a terrible trouble with inpatients and day case waiting times, and you can't understand it. I went to one hospital where they'd got all their data loaded up, and I was talking to the general managers, and I said, did you have a really terrible time with waiting times around about June, July last year in general surgery? Yes, how did you know? I said, well, you did a waiting list initiative in outpatients, didn't you? Yes. You forgot about the conversions, didn't you? Yes. Right, there we go. So we've had the sprint for the line, and there we go, finishing up on 8 weeks. Right on the end of it there. How are we doing for time? We're finishing up at 1 o'clock sharp, I think, aren't we? I've just got time to shape 1 or 2 more things. There's a gastroenterology elective waiting list. Not from England. Anybody thoughts? Can you see? Let's go back.
Reflection.
Oh, you got a reflection. Any thoughts about that list?
Partially booked, long waiting urgents, quite a few of them.
Long waiting urgents, absolutely dominated by long waiting urgents, yeah. Partially booked? Right, hands up for fully booked. Hands up for partially booked. Hands up for complete mess. Yeah, I'm with complete mess, personally.
No, sorry. You said you've only got 6 lines on there.
Yeah. That's how we're going to model it. Well, this is a slide, so we're not going to model this one, but yeah. So, a bit of a mess. Let me tell you the story of this one. So they've got, how do you think the gastroenterologists who actually ran this service felt about it?
They thought they were always very dizzy.
Yeah, they really did. They were in a state of complete despair. Just before we went in to present to the gastroenterologists this finding, I ran into the operational manager in the corridor outside the meeting and asked her if she had trouble getting urgent patients booked in. She said, yes, it's really awful. I said, have you told anyone? She said, well, yes, but everybody's got pressure. So I had to tell her that the level of pressure that she was, well, there's different levels of pressure, aren't there? I mean, there's pressure when you're having trouble getting routines treated within a particular waiting time. But being unable to get urgent patients treated at all is a completely different order of magnitude that is life-threatening for those patients. So we went in and showed the gastroenterologists their waiting list. And then we showed them what their waiting list would look like a year from now if they carried on treating patients at the same rate as they had been. And you can see that all the routine patients are frozen in time, and they're just struggling to keep on top of the urgents. And then we showed them a simulation where activity was much bigger than demand, and they were able to eat away at this waiting list over time until it was almost gone. And what that told them was something they'd never seen before. Because they had been doing extra sessions. They've been doing quite a lot of extra sessions. They were working quite hard, to be fair. It just wasn't quite enough. And what we were able to show them was what enough looks like. And that was the light at the end of the tunnel that really got them going. That's what happened to the size of their waiting list. So we met them in February 2015, that's about there. That's what happened to the size of their waiting list. So a year later, they were down there. This snapshot is taken here, and the dotted blue line is the model's projection of what's going to happen in the future. And the number of patients on the list over 4 weeks, that's what happened. How did they do it? They worked their socks off. No other word for it. They absolutely threw sessions at this. But they knew how much was enough. That was the key. They could see what was enough. And they did it, and they held it. And it was remarkable, absolutely remarkable. So it just goes to show the power of knowing what you need to do. Just for some sort of finishers, every month when Debbie clicks the button and the numbers go up on the NHS England website, we churn them through some software and we produce some analysis. It's free to download. You've all got NHS email addresses. You can go to guru.co.uk, just register yourself, and then go to the reports section. And you can look at this for any trust or any specialty in the country from Friday lunchtime probably. So I haven't picked on King's for any particular reason. I've just picked one that looked nice. So here's King's Urology. This dotted red line is the incomplete pathways going out into the never. The red triangle is their current 92% performance, so it's indicating weeks, not percentages. So there we go, there's the 92% performance as it is at the moment. This green line is an estimate of what that list would look like if you turned the dinosaur into an elephant, if the patient scheduling was done according to the way that simulator would do it. And that would give them a waiting time shown by the green triangle. So that's telling us there's a lot of assumptions that you have to make. I mean, the nationally published data doesn't tell you everything that you might need to know. I mean, for instance, the nationally published data doesn't contain the urgency rate. It'd be quite nice to know the urgency. I think clinical urgency ought to be a mandatory return in SUS. It ought to be a mandatory field in SUS. Actually, two urgencies. Firstly, the original urgency, and secondly, the updated urgency. But the field already exists in SUS for urgency. It'd be nice to collect that and get more intelligence about clinical urgency. What we've done is to look and see how many patients are treated within 9 weeks RTT to go along with 62-day cancer. And that's why we put the urgency elbow there, and then the rest of it is drawn according to the formula that mimics the way the simulator behaves. So anyway, it's an estimate of roughly what's the best you could do with good patient scheduling alone. And that would get King's urology from 29 weeks down to 23 weeks, 30 weeks down to 24 weeks, but not all the way to 18 weeks, which tells you that scheduling alone won't do it. They also need to reduce the size of the waiting list if they want to get that below 18 weeks. So that's the purpose of that. Any proper analysis of RTT, I think, should unpick those two drivers of waiting times. It should separate the effect of the list size and the effect of scheduling. So that's that. Do feel free to play on our website. I'll skip over that one. Here's some data that's originated from this building. You may remember this. Did you produce this chart, Tick? Or was it you, Debbie?
It was actually analytical colleagues in the Department of Health that did this,
Oh,
but we
right.
use it a lot
Yes.
as well.
I really like this chart because it tells such a powerful story. I mean, here's time going from dark green and then up through the blues. Something very, very dramatic has obviously happened here, hasn't it? I mean, it's just astonishing. So what happened was that the 18 week, if you remember back in the late 2000s, the 18-week target was met. It was met because in the sense that 90% of admitted patients had waited less than 18 weeks. But quota management was rife at the time. Quota management is where you go, right, if 90% of the patients I admit have to have waited less than 18 weeks, then every time I admit one patient who's waited more than 18 weeks, that means I need to admit then 9 patients who've waited less than 18 weeks. And if you just keep doing that, you achieve the target. It doesn't matter how many patients are waiting on the waiting list for a very long time. As long as you don't treat too many of them, you'll achieve the target, and that's what people were doing. So there's the percentage. So this is based on the waiting list. So the target was achieved initially in inverted commas, and then later it was achieved properly. As the waiting list continued to fall, people were able to achieve it properly, so patients weren't even waiting that long. So it sort of consolidated, and things got better and better and better. Then in early 2012, the incompletes target was introduced, and suddenly trusts were compelled by virtue of a standard to make sure that the waiting list was within 18 weeks. They couldn't just do it with quota management. At about the same time, and there's possibly a bit of cause and effect, I don't know, but at the same time the resource squeeze was starting to bite and the waiting list was growing. So the waiting list started to grow, but because people were concerned about the patient scheduling in a way they hadn't been before, waiting times didn't get worse immediately, they just sort of stabilised. And then, as the waiting list continued to grow quite rapidly, there was no holding it back, and performance started to decline. So, really, really nice bit of data viz there, I think, that shows that something's definitely happened. I do a blog. It's usually in the HSJ, either on sometimes on Thursday, more often on Monday, depending on schedules like at the HSJ. In it, there are a couple of things that I track. It won't surprise you, given what I've said so far, but I'm always trying to tease apart the impact of list size and the impact of patient scheduling. Now, when you're looking at national level figures, patient scheduling is a bit more complicated because it's not just about treating the urgents and then doing the routines in turn. You're looking at the national waiting list, and that's made up of thousands and thousands of little sub-waiting lists. Every specialty and every trust is a separate queue, and in some places even the specialties are broken down into subspecialties, particularly in orthopaedics. And that aggregation makes a huge difference, because some places got, if you're looking at spinal surgery at North Bristol, then that's a national pressure subspecialty, long waiting times, and then you may have gynecology at a DGH where everything's very short because you've got to have so many obstetricians to keep on top of the maternity workload, but it's no problem getting through the waiting list. So, that sort of adding up factor makes a big difference. I've tried to capture, well, here's the waiting list size, and that's the raw waiting list size. I'll show you the list over arrival rate in a minute. But there's the raw waiting list size, and then I've got, if you wanted to achieve 18 weeks now with the current waiting list shape, you'd need to get the list size down to that. And if you could achieve it with a tighter waiting list shape, which more in a second, you'd only need to get it down to there, but we're still sort of about 2 years of growth away from 18 weeks at the moment. Then this chart wraps up all of the effects other than list size. So that is the order in which patients are treated, the imbalances in different waiting lists, and so on. In 2011, I just call it the Index of Waiting List Management. Now, and before it was there, in case anyone was interested. So, in 2011, that is what it looked like through the year, so before the Incomplete Pathways target was introduced. When the Incomplete Pathways target kicked in 2012, it nosedived, which is good, and it came down to this level. And then from 2013 up to 2016, it stayed down at this level here. Absolutely consistent, year after year. Then last August, something rather strange happened. It suddenly popped up. I don't know why. It may be that that's when the capacity pressure started to bite on the non-electives. That makes it difficult with beds to get in long waiting inpatients, particularly the heavy cases, who are the ones that tend to hang out anyway. Could be, I don't know. Anyway, something happened, it popped up, and it stayed at that higher level ever since. And that's why that one there is where you need to get the list down to achieve 18 weeks with the current index. But if you could get back to the level of the previous years, then you'd only need to get down to there. It's nearly 1 o'clock. I think I'll stop there. If anybody's got a couple of questions, very happy to take them before we finish up. Yeah.
I've got a couple of questions. Did you play a lot of Tetris when you were younger?
I did play a bit of Tetris when I was younger. Yes. Although I was more an Elite Dangerous fan, to be honest.
Lost me already. My main question was about, commented recently about how the NHS still thinks in terms of parts of the pathway doesn't track the patient.
It manages and bypasses the
Why
pathway.
do you think that is? I mean, because 18 weeks has been around a long time, and
No, it's just how hospitals work. So let's say you've got a dodgy knee, you go to your GP, GP says, don't like the look of that, I'd like you to see a specialist, so you get referred to the hospital. Now, there's a lot of very good work going on at the moment to try to rethink outpatients. Every time a doctor needs to give an opinion, does the patient really need to trundle into the hospital and sit down in a clinic? All of that is really good stuff, but a specialist opinion is required. And that happens at the moment in clinic, it could happen on the phone, but it happens in a particular way. And it's managed in a particular part of the hospital IT system, and so on. Now, the specialist at that point might say, either if I go home, or you definitely need an operation, I'm sticking you on the waiting list for treatment, or I'm not sure I'd like to see a CT or an MRI. That might happen in maybe 5%, 10% of cases. If you have a CT or an MRI, now you are referred on to the radiology department. You go into their IT system and you go along and managed by them, and then you get passed back to outpatients for a follow-up, or in the future maybe over your mobile phone, and then a decision to admit, a decision to treat is reached. And then you wait for an operation, and the operation happens in the operating theatres. Now, it's these different settings, these different IT systems, which make all of those different stages of treatment different, because they're administered differently within the hospital. And one of the challenges with RCT is it's very difficult, they've done it now, but it has been very difficult to pull all the waiting lists from outpatients, radiology, the follow-ups, and the patients waiting for operations, to pull them all into one place to get a view of the RTT waiting list. And actually, in most hospitals, that doesn't even happen on the main hospital PAS system. They do it on a completely separate bureaucracy, which called the PTL, and very often in a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet, and it's managed manually. And it's really quite hard for them to do. So that's one reason why I think it would be a good idea to certainly to consider breaking 18 weeks down into 2 stages, possibly 3. One is from referral to decision, the other is from decision to treatment, because you want to get to decision quickly. You don't want to be in a state of uncertainty, not quite knowing what's wrong with you.
It feels to me like there's not been a cultural appetite to change. Every other sector, to me, feels like it's harnessed the sort of IT revolution. And it still feels like the hospitals are just thinking in exceptional terms. My job is to see these people in outpatients, if I pass diagnostics, then that's my bit done. Rather than thinking, well, how is this from the patient perspective? How long is it waiting cumulatively for a resolution?
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of force in that. However, you still have, if you're trying to plan the capacity that a hospital needs to keep up with demand, we've seen how important that is. You have to plan each bit separately, and the most expensive bit is the treatment bit, when they get the operation. And you want to be able to plan how many theatre hours a week to lay on, how many beds you need, and all of that. And that inevitably is a different capacity calculation to anything involving diagnostics and outpatients.
I guess other things being equal, you might want to give priority to those whose whole pathway weight has been greatest, rather than just the weight within that stage of pathway. So in your scheduling?
Yes, so the patients who get held up at the decision stage would then be expedited at the next stage. Yeah, I mean, I'm not disagreeing with you. However, if we got all stages down, and is that the cause of the very long waits that we're seeing? I don't think it is. You've got capacity. I mean, look, take the 52-week plus waiters. They broadly fall into 2 camps, I think. You've got areas where there is system-wide capacity shortage, and then you've got pop-ups where they've discovered a waiting list that wasn't previously being reported, and they probably should have. That's broadly it, isn't it? Right. Any others? I think we've reached.
So on your King's slide, you had a green block for where they could get weights down to.
Yeah.
Presumably you could sort of add up across all specialties, across all providers, and then come out with an equivalent red blob on your last slide.
Yeah.
For what sort of waiting list you could achieve.
Yes.
Would that, and that would be higher than the other 2, would it?
Yes, it would. Yeah. It might well be above where the list is at the moment.
Yeah. So I'm curious to know what that number would be.
In fact, I think it probably would.
What performance we could achieve given the current waiting list size if everyone was green.
Well, you're making quite a lot of assumptions. I mean, firstly, you'd have to make an assumption about how many are really urgent, and there's probably less than the number being treated quickly in practice. Secondly, you're assuming that every single specialty level waiting list in the country could be brought into line, so they've all got the same underlying pressures. But yeah, if I was to take a guess, I'd say that would be a substantially bigger waiting list than we have in real life.
you saying that, so that's the performance gap between the green and the red?
Based on
that
patient scheduling alone.
based on just that? So if they
Yes.
were organising, managing it better, they could get to that without any additional capacity.
Correct.
But it
Any
assumes
case.
that specialty is also just one list. And
Yeah.
not that you need to
But
manage
you-
them.
so are you saying,
Urology, well, at King's, they'll have cancer subspecialties and
are
everything.
you saying, Chris, you could add up all those gaps and you'd know kind of how much
you
we
could
could deliver
improve
without,
performance for your current waiting list size.
Yes.
without
That's
putting any
absolutely
more money
true, but also remember when we did the simulation with the growing waiting list, it's the direction of travel that really counts on that, because if that list is getting bigger faster than demand is growing, which it is,
Yeah.
then even if you've got the one-off gain of better scheduling and evening out waiting times today, it would still grow.
Yeah.
So in the long run, what really matters is getting that list size down.
That's one more really quick one.
Go for it.
So, what is it that you sell to trusts? Is it a product or is it consultancy or is it...
No, we're not a consultancy. Let me show you. It is. We sell planning, so demand and capacity planning. So here's an example for orthopaedics. First outpatients, emergencies, inpatients, day cases. We can work out what their bed occupancy, the relationship between bed occupancy and risk for non-electives. We can work out the beds, theatres and clinics they need to deliver activity scenarios. For instance, to achieve a waiting time result, a negative waiting time result, or to keep up with demand. And that plan is then broken down. Where have I got it? Breaks the plan down week by week. So there's week by week waiting times in that thumbnail. Theatre hours a week, clinic hours a week, beds, activity. So we sell demand and capacity planning, that's what we do.
How many have good enough data to make your tool usable?
All of them. No, not quite all of them. Trusts will always tell you that their data is really, really poor and they can hardly do anything with it. I don't think that's true. I think it's good enough that they can get something really useful out of it. I mean, one of the things that we've designed the system to do is to be resilient to the most common causes of data problem. So usually their activity data is pretty good. Usually their addition to the list data is pretty ropey. Their removals data is pretty ropey. The list size data is fairly ropey, but systematically, so that changes in list size are reasonably reliable. And with that, you can build up quite a decent measure of demand and therefore calculate capacity. In my experience, it's always good enough to get something useful out of it. And you can get under the figures all the way to patient level in many cases to really understand what impact known data problems or detected data problems are going to have. There's a very simple sum that you used to do back in Kerner return days, which was to look at the number of patients being added to the list and see whether it matched the activity plus the removals plus the growth in the list, which it should, and it never did. And you understandably gave up chasing them too hard over it. In my experience, when you get that data out of trust, I'm happy if it's within 10%. Usually, first cut of data, it can be 30, 40, 50% out, and then oh yeah, we haven't counted these, we have counted those, we shouldn't have done. You sort all of that sort of stuff out, and then suddenly, bang, it's down to usually within about 10%, and then you sort out endoscopy and you tidy up the, But you can usually get it to within 10%, and within 10%, you can do, really pretty good demand and capacity planning, I think. And you can do waiting list simulations that make sense to the consultants and all of that good stuff. You can visualise theatre productivity, which we do as well, and analyse how the beds are being used, what the risk on cancellations is through beds, and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah.
I might have to
we're gonna
put on
vacate.
questions because I'm just
Yes,
concerned that people are going to start booting us out in a moment.
Yeah. If anybody wants to email me, info@guru.co.uk, we've